we were lucky enough to be able to have those small wins here and there when needed, but we didn't come from a whole bunch of cash that, the way it may sound.
Right.
But if you have no money, there is a way to make it work. It's just figuring out how to raise those funds.
You are listening to The Anatomy of a Startup, a Wellbeing Coffee production. Enjoy.
So we made it to episode 2 on funding, revenue, and profit. What was your first job? Like the first thing you ever made money doing?
So first official job where I got a paycheck or just made money?
No, I made money like under the grandma gave me 20
table.
bucks or something.
Yeah. Babysitting. I would babysit from I think I was 11. I don't know why people trusted me with their children when I was 11 years old.
I wouldn't trust you with my child now.
I always thought I was older. I had 3 older siblings. So, but 11, I would babysit. Actually, when I was 11, almost 12, no, I was 11. I would ride my 10-speed bike down to the Thompson's house, which was 7 or 8 houses down. And I would watch little Brian Thompson from 7 until 5 every day, 5 days a week during my summer.
10 hours.
Yeah. I would cook for the family and I would clean, and they paid me $50 a week. And I thought I was rolling in it. I was making over $200 a month.
Yeah.
And but I was 11. But at the same time, my mom was down the street. But I really did. I cooked, I cleaned, and I watched little Brian Thompson.
So what is that? $1 an hour?
Sounds about right.
Yeah, 10 a day, 5 a week.
Wow, They got to steal.
Yeah, wow. Yeah,
But,
I need to find some 11-year-old to scam
I know.
and watch my kids.
Exactly.
Good idea. Yeah, I think I don't know if I ever really made anything under the table. No, I used to sell Snickers bars from Sam's Club. I would buy a big box of King Snickers bars, and they were 50 cents each, and I'd sell them for $1.50 on the bus.
Nice.
Yeah. So,
yes.
And then I got paid to work for my church in the music thing, in the music ministry when I was older.
I had a job lined up for when I turned 14, because you couldn't get a worker's permit until you turned 14.
Yeah.
And so I remember writing the congressman when I was 13 because I wanted a job and I wanted him to change the rule because I wanted to go ahead and start working, but I wasn't allowed to. So instead, because it didn't happen, I had everything ready. I had interviewed, and literally on my birthday when I turned 14, I worked at Gorin's in the Carolina Place Mall in Charlotte, scooping ice cream and then stealing a little ice cream too.
So is that where the money came from to start Wellbeing?
No.
All this saved up ice cream money?
No.
Where did
Nope.
where did the funds come from to start Wellbeing? I think I remember you mentioned you were basically paying me out of John's salary at one point.
Yeah. Well, we had saved some money knowing I wanted to start a business, not knowing how much it would cost. We did have some savings. We had some investments. We didn't really want to have to pull from the investments unless we had to. So we put some money aside because I was a stay-at-home mom at this point. I had a 1 and a 3-year-old when I started Wellbeing. So we saved as much as we could out of John's check and savings from the past several years, and then went and got personal loans. So again, the banks wouldn't give me funding because we talked about in the last episode how this type of coffee, restaurant, cafe is super high risk. So banks didn't want to touch it unless you've been in business 2 years.
Yeah.
So it was all personally funded, credit cards, and just hustling to make money as quick as we could.
Talk about the personal funding. It's a little silly, or it seems a little silly, right? That you can go to a bank and be like, give me a loan as a business, and they're like, no. And you're like, okay, well, it's just me now. And they're like, okay, now here's some money.
Yes, so the difference is, when you're incorporated, if you get a loan that is not tied to assets, because the business is so young, there's not a lot of assets to borrow against.
Oh, but maybe you have a house as a person.
Right. So your house, they look at your 401k, all your savings, they look at your credit history, because just the business, you have no credit, you just started.
Right.
And so they'll look at your personal credit, but you're on the line personally for any business loans until you get to a certain size of a business. So even a year ago, before the acquisition, I would borrow money and I would be personally liable for that. So I'm really thankful that the acquisition paid off all of the business debt, and now we have 7 years of tenure, so I can get loans just through the business now versus having to put our livelihood on the line.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, you have to, because so many businesses fail, and those banks would lose out and not be in business anymore if they loaned to everybody.
And my next question was going to be, at what point were you able to stop adding your own money in and kind of start paying yourself back? Like at what point from 2013?
Right.
Was it 2017? But it sounds like it was closer to present day than anything.
Yes. So I remember each year, I knew I wouldn't pay myself the first couple of years, because if you want to build a business, it's different than just being employed by the business.
Right.
Where if I just wanted to work myself and roast the coffee and sell, and I could do it on a really small scale and pay myself. But there's no way to really reinvest that cash into the business and pay myself. Yeah. And so 2 years went by, still, not in a ton of debt compared to what we could have been in if we didn't hustle and do what we needed to, like buying used equipment on Craigslist. That would always always break.
Yep.
But we did what we had to. But then third year came around, and I'm still can't pay myself, because I needed to pay you guys, and I needed to give you guys increases in pay.
Right.
And I wanted to give to Newsong. And so that came first before I could pay myself. So third year came around, fourth year came around, and finally, the beginning of the fifth year, we had crossed enough of profitability that I could start paying myself. But I think I only paid myself $25,000 a year to start.
Yeah.
And then eventually I was able to get back up. But it wasn't until over the last year I could pay myself what I think was fair.
All right.
But good investment, because then we were acquired,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
it paid off 7 years later.
It did,
Yeah.
and that's what I want entrepreneurs to remember. Like, yes, you could go and get a six-figure job or a really well-paying job, but you can also take a little bit less money, and it's making you save. If I had a six-figure job for the last 7 years, I probably would have spent a lot of it.
Right.
You live, within your means, and if your pay goes up, you tend to spend more.
Right.
And so it made me kind of save by keeping it within the business.
Yeah.
And now the same thing with the acquisition money. There's some that's going back into the business, and the rest is put aside to make sure I can still have this business and support it if need be, which, with COVID right now, it's a pretty important thing to keep some money stashed away.
Yes. Yep. Doing that myself. So you're talking about your salary. As I understand it, for a while, your salary was technically a member draw. Can you explain what that is, like how it works from a bookkeeping perspective, how it relates to like personal investment into the business, yada yada.
Right, and I am no tax professional
Right.
whatsoever.
Do not use this. Anybody listening, do not take tax advice from us.
So we incorporated as an LLC, and so that just means anything that I make within the business follows through to my personal taxes. And so if the business was profitable $100,000, then I'm profitable $100,000, and that's what I have to pay taxes on.
Yeah.
So you don't pay yourself with a W-2 and only pay taxes on that with an LLC. So our fifth or sixth year, we ended up filing as an S-Corp, meaning we're an LLC, but we file our taxes as an S-Corp when I finally started paying myself, and that way I could pay myself with the W-2. But I still can take member draws, and I'm still taxed on that, so it gets a little confusing.
Yeah.
But member draws basically where you can just pull from the company and use it for personal reasons, but you have to show that on your taxes that was a member draw. But really, I was paying myself back.
Right. Yeah. So it's not real. You're not really paying yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
So we calculated anything I was spending personally was looked at as a member loan. So all the money that we invested for those first 4 years, there was on our balance sheet, there was an amount that says member loan. And so when I would take those draws, it basically was paying us back.
Subtracting from that.
Right,
amount.
So I didn't have to pay taxes on those, which was fantastic. I mean, we didn't have to pay taxes for years because I just lived on what I had already invested.
Yeah. So something to keep in mind if you have invested a bunch of money in a company you started don't take out a salary. Like don't count it as salary if you're taking money back out.
But eventually, the IRS wants their money too.
Yeah, they do.
And so
Right.
they want you to start paying yourself, a decent enough of a salary. Like when I paid myself, I think $25,000 in that 5th year. I knew I couldn't stay at that because it could raise some red flags if you don't pay yourself enough.
Yeah.
So it's a balance. But that's why any company, you need a good CPA.
Yeah.
I would say that's somewhere you really need to spend your money because, we've had some issues in the past with it before, and then it's really expensive one day to correct it. So a good CPA is worth the investment.
Cool. Great. So you kind of self-funded to start with some personal loans. We kind of got to a decent size, not really taking out as many personal loans. Were there any points at that time where we needed major amount of capital that just wasn't there? And I guess that could be in two ways, right? Like it'd either be a big growth opportunity, funding like, one of our really big accounts that needed 100 machines or something. Or
Right.
I guess it could also be in a situation where there's some kind of emergency funding that you may have needed, but did either of those things happen at any point?
Okay, so yes, but before I jump into that, I do want to say, because I don't want to be discouraging to those entrepreneurs that are out there. They're like, well, great, she had money to spend. We really didn't compared to what we needed for this
sure.
business, but what if there's an entrepreneur that they don't have anything and they can't get a loan?
Yeah.
And so that's the really tough thing. We were lucky enough to be able to have those small wins here and there when needed, but we didn't come from a whole bunch of cash that, the way it may sound.
Right.
But if you have no money, there is a way to make it work. It's just figuring out how to raise those funds. I would generally say don't give away equity unless you have to.
Yeah.
Now, some people can get an investor and, they could put in a little bit of money and get money that way. But one thing I really want to point out is I think you were with me. It was probably in our third year in business. And do you remember there was that guy that we were going to work with? His name was also Steve. And he was going to buy into almost 50% of the business. And he was going to give us $40,000 because we needed $40,000.
So he was valuing you at $80,000.
Well, but I mean, we probably weren't even worth that,
it's funny, right? Yeah.
And
Great,
that sounded like so much money,
right?
Right. But I was going to give that away, and I had already worked so hard and already put in so much money, and I'm so glad it did not work out because just, a handful of years later with the acquisition, I would have lost so much.
Yeah.
And so don't give away equity unless you have to. If you're going to give away equity, make sure it's the right partnership.
Yep.
Like you and Kevin now are getting equity in the business over the next 5 years as partners, but you've worked for me for 6 years,
right?
And Kevin for 4, and so I know we work well together.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to say that prior. There are ways to raise funds where you can have a partner that comes in to give you a loan, and then they may get paid back with interest. There are ways to work it if you can sell your idea.
Yeah.
So don't be discouraged if you don't have the money right in your bank account. There's ways to do it. And if you're a true entrepreneur, you're very innovative and you will figure it out.
You'll figure
it out. You will. Just take some steps forward.
Yep.
Now, ask me your question again.
No, you're
it's
fine.
Gone.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say too, I think you still have, you and John, right? It's like 51-49. You still 100% own Wellbeing, right?
We do.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and we wanted to do it that way where, I'm majority owner as a female. There's a lot of benefits that can come along with a minority owned business. And John literally has been an investor from day one where he's not worked in the business at all. But he was paying with his paycheck to pay for Wellbeing. So, I had to give him some.
Right. A little something. Right. The question I asked before, was there any point, so, we kind of got out of the toilsome early phases where funding is kind of difficult and, at this, let's say we're 3 to 4 years in, were there any points where an opportunity came up where you needed a big amount of capital and it wasn't there and you had to go to the bank with that, or did any emergencies come up where you're like, now we all of a sudden owe $100,000 and we don't know where that's going to come from?
Right.
What did you do at those times when maybe the cash wasn't there to deal with that?
Right. So we have had some great opportunities with large clients that need quite a bit of equipment, machinery, and so it's very capital intensive and it's an incredible client, but if you can't put the equipment in there, then you're not going to get the account.
Right.
And so there could have been opportunities to just go to the bank to get another loan, but I didn't want so much debt on my balance sheet. I mean, it can feel suffocating to be in so much debt. So again, as an entrepreneur, I had to figure out, how can I raise funds so I can get this account but not be in crazy debt on the balance sheet? So it just so happened that I met Rick Veach, Pure Water Partners, through that water company that we worked with. And we may talk about this in another episode, but this is really the changing point within Wellbeing, because the bean to cup machines were what we really needed, but they're $4,000 or $5,000 each. And one of the accounts, one of the publicly traded accounts, we needed about $120,000 worth of equipment, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I was like, well, how am I going to do this? But I need to, I'll figure it out. So we worked with Pure Water Partners to fund a lot of our equipment. What that means is I will set up a rental between the client and Pure Water Partners, where let's say it's 36 months and they pay $150 per month per machine. And then Pure Water Partners will take that, they'll give me the money up front for the equipment, and then they will bill the client. And then after that client pays the note off, then we start receiving those rentals and the equipment's paid for. And then the client takes on the risk versus Wellbeing. And so we really had hardly any debt on our books because of that. And because of that relationship, we were able to grow really fast. Like, we had a lot of capital when we didn't.
Yeah.
And we secured long contracts.
Well, I was going to say, it helps with client retention because, like, I mean, and it wasn't necessarily the case that they were locked into using our, like, they weren't legally bound to use our coffee for 36 months.
Right.
We had that separate coffee service agreement, which is a little technical, but I think it did make that association of 36-month contract, we're with Wellbeing for 36 months.
Yes.
And I don't remember when we looked at the acquisition paperwork, we looked at like total client retention over time, and it was well north of 90%. It was 95 plus north percent.
Which I think is really rare.
Right, yeah.
Because again, we'd been doing office coffee for almost 5 years by the point of the acquisition, and we have only lost a handful of accounts.
Yeah.
And generally it's because that company was acquired or something big happened. It wasn't because our service was bad.
Right.
It was something outside of our control. But those contracts really made a difference. And again, that was hard because all of our competitors would give free equipment, no contracts. So it was an uphill battle. But when I did secure a contract, then it was for the long haul. And so, but again, in business, you have to be innovative, and you can't always take the route of just borrowing money. Because what if you have a hard time and you can't pay that bill? And the way this worked out is the client was on the hook for it, but we were going to provide great service and give them quality products, but that way we weren't on the line. So I think it's really important for budding entrepreneurs to figure out a workaround. And if it's not traditional, that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's what separated us.
Yeah.
It really did. And when we went to be acquired, our value went up dramatically because of those contracts and because we would get rentals. So usually in OCS, when you're acquired, they pay you a certain amount based on your total revenue, and that's because a lot of people don't do rentals. But we had the revenue, and then we had this recurring revenue for equipment, and so we got paid on both ends.
Yeah.
And so it made a lot of sense.
Great. And that's great because the next topic is revenue. And my first question with regards to revenue is, how did when we first started doing OCS, we talked about how we switched to that from the kiosk model last episode. How did revenues compare that first year, say, to the kiosk? Mm-hmm. Do you remember?
Oh, I do. And I love it because it was such little money. So 2013, again, we didn't start until August, September at Southeastern, but we revenued under 17,000. It was 16 and change.
Yeah.
The next year, in 14, we did 52,000.
Yep.
And then in 15, we did 102,000. And then in 16, we did 307,000. And 17, we went over $1 million, which was really exciting. And then we would double almost every year we've been in business in our revenue.
Yeah. So a little bit more money than the kiosk, I'd say.
Yeah, the kiosk. Sorry. So the kiosk was
right. I just
14.
Meant
so that was $52,000.
Yeah, something
very,
like that. Yeah.
Very little.
but then the profit margins were a lot better, of course, with the OCS than the kiosk.
Right.
And so at some point in that period, like right around the point where we hit the black, where we were breaking even, I know that didn't happen immediately, but at that point, what was the rough breakdown, like percentage-wise, of how cash was being spent around the time we broke even-ish? Just the ballpark, like overhead, payroll,
Right.
cost of goods. Like if you could just kind of give us a rough snapshot at that time.
So we can take it in different buckets. So, if we charge, on every dollar, our cost of goods were between 40 and 60% generally. Better on coffee. Coffee was probably only like 30% or so. Most of our products were 40 to 60% cost of goods. So our margins, let's say on average, you can take 50%.
Sure.
So if we make $100, we've profited a gross profit of 50. But then that doesn't include payroll and trucks and liability. And so most OCS providers will profit 10% per year.
Okay.
If they're doing really, really good, they can go up to net profit.
Yeah.
Yeah, like bottom line, 10%. Sometimes you don't make that at all in the beginning in building the business, but 10%. But the goal is to get closer to 18%. And if you're doing a really good job, 18% is like the goal net profit.
What kind of like how much of that was payroll, like employees and payroll?
So,
like of a given, it doesn't matter the exact, number,
right.
but like, was it like it's 40, 30% of our cost payroll?
No, well, not always. So payroll would fluctuate because when you're in growth mode, you have to hire, and then you're overstaffed for a little while, but you want to make sure that you have enough to take on those big contracts.
Right.
But then there were times where we were stretched really thin and we knew we needed to hire.
Right.
But we couldn't yet at that point, or we hadn't found the right person. And so it was an ebb and flow. But on average, 21 to 25% is what we would see in our salaries and payroll. But then it could get up to 30% here and there.
And I guess that's going to vary with the business too, right? Like ours was very service oriented, and we had to have a lot of bodies in the field, and maybe somebody else who's doing kind of a more standalone, making something at their house and selling that is not going to have as much payroll cost.
And again, that's the difference in being self-employed and running a business where you have employees. You're going to make more money in the beginning being self-employed. You're going to make a lot more money in the long run creating a business.
Yep. So we were talking about revenue. I want to talk about streams of revenue now, and like how we added some on at times or took some away.
Sure.
I tend to personally try to keep as things simple and as few revenue streams as possible, but then maximizing within those revenue streams.
Yes.
Whereas you're a yes person and you want to just say yes to all the revenue streams because it's more streams of revenue. And there's so I want to talk about two different cases where it worked in one instance to add one on, and where it didn't work in another to add one on. So the first instance of this would be adding on pantry for businesses. So tell us what that is, why you wanted to add it on. I guess I'll say why I didn't. And then,
so for our listeners, pantry in the office coffee scene is snacks, drinks, any types of items or consumables paid for by the employer. So there are all those tech companies that have these killer break rooms, and they have beef jerky and Kind bars, and it's all free, right? And it's a part of the way that they recruit talent. And I love it because it's like a new trend, and it really helped us build business.
Yeah.
And I could see that really taking off since we're here in Raleigh-Durham. I mean, we're tech central, pharma central. And so I knew a lot of companies were making that move towards providing this kind of all-inclusive workspace. And so I wanted to get on board with that, but I knew it would be a lot of SKUs, which means we would have a lot of inventory to shuffle into house. We'd have to have a bigger warehouse. We'd have to have expensive inventory software. Things expire. I knew it would be a lot of work, but I also knew it would be a lot of revenue. And what kind of put us over the edge was that large publicly traded company, and they wanted, a couple hundred SKUs of snacks and drinks and so on. And so in order to get that account, we'd have to get into it. And I said, if we get this contract, we're jumping in.
Yeah.
And a lot of people said, don't do it. Just focus on where you're good. And I'm glad I didn't listen then. I always, I'm happy for that. And we'll talk about the other side where I'm not as happy that I jumped into something else. But when it comes down to it, you have to figure out, does this make sense? Is it really going to turn around the bottom line, or is it going to distract you from what you're really good at?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I was opposed to it at the time. I mean, mainly for selfish, not mainly. I think maybe 50-50, partially for selfish reasons, right? Because I had to figure out how to implement it when we added it on. And then Ashley was as well, and Kevin.
Oh, yeah.
But,
Ashley took it was the most painful for her, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, she was shopping, for milk and creamer and apples.
We were still doing that up until last year.
Right.
So, it's, it kept its downsides, but it did keep more upside in that it did bring us a lot more revenue. I don't remember what our percentage was there at the end, but I think it was something like 7. You probably know better than I do. The percentage of pantry
we
sales.
were over 50%.
Yeah,
over 50% of our revenue.
Yeah.
And again, with the acquisition, we were valued based on revenue.
Yeah.
So, cut our revenue in half if we didn't do pantry, and we would have gotten.
I think that's another way to kind of think about it is like, if your goal is to sell, maybe add on revenue streams even if it hurts. But if your goal is to slowly grow and keep it yourself and have this as a career, maybe don't.
That's a really good point, because that's one thing I don't know if entrepreneurs think about in the beginning. You always have to have an exit strategy. And so what does that look like? And you might not know exactly how that's going to play out, but I knew I wanted to build a business and then sell it, because I know my personality and that I get tired of things and I want to try the next thing, so it doesn't feel redundant.
Yeah.
So I knew that's what I wanted, and I knew we'd be valued higher because of it.
Yeah.
But if someone just wants to build a family business and their main goal is it needs to be profitable so they can sustain, so you really have to look at your ultimate goals before you make decisions like that. And then know what you could be acquired for.
Yeah.
And so I met with merger and acquisition people long before I was acquired to find out what's the most important thing, because you can look on Google and they talk about multiples of your profitability, and I'm looking at our P&L statement, our profit and loss, and we're not profitable at all. I'm like, so does that mean I'm worth nothing? But that's not true, because there's assets in the business and there's revenue that if it's sold to another operator where they basically take over your client list, they have better buying power. So you just really have to know your market and what you really are valued at, and then aim your goals towards those.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go to the other one.
Okay.
That was pantry. Adding that on more,
it worked.
It worked.
Yay. Yay me.
Great. Now let's
talk about where I didn't make the best decision.
Right. Well, so Micromarkets is kind of one I wanted to focus on next. What made you want to get into Micromarkets? What are they?
Yeah. So Micromarkets are convenience stores that are kind of a grab and go within larger office buildings. Generally, employee counts of 100 or more would qualify to have this Micromarket. So we would purchase.
Unmanned.
And they're unmanned, yes.
Yeah.
Now there's security cameras, there's a self-pay kiosk system that has software with it, and then you set up all the retail racks like you would see in gas stations and so on. Now you see them at the airport where you can kind of grab and go and pay with your card.
Yep.
And they're kind of all the rage right now. And don't get me wrong, I loved working with 365 Markets. They were incredible. It really did get us into a better network within NAMA and our industry. But markets, you really have to want to jump in and really build markets. It's not something that you dabble with, because it's completely different than pantry. Pantry, employer pays, so if it expires and they don't use it, that's on the employer. Now, obviously, we don't want that to happen.
Right.
But with markets, it expires, it's on you.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, vending is never secured. You put the product out there and it can be stolen.
Yeah.
It can go bad, or just not sell. And so you have a lot more risk. And I found that it was about 25% sales and revenue versus what I had in pantry for the same size account.
Right. Yeah. And I think one of your main motivations for doing it too was we had to be competitive, right? Like biggest competitors were doing it. So it's like, well, if we're going to try to get these big contracts,
right,
we need to try to do it as well.
And there were times where there were 2 in specific where I lost a contract specifically because we couldn't do a market.
Yeah.
And I even tried to outsource it and bring in a company to do the markets for us. And the company, the clients were like, no, we really need a one-stop shop. And we did everything but markets.
Yeah.
And so after losing those 2 contracts, I said, man, if I want to play with the big dogs and I want to go up against Capital Coffee and Canteen and Aramark, they all do that. I have to get into this. And so that's why I don't want to say 100% it was wrong. We weren't valued as high on that revenue stream with the acquisition.
Sure.
And there was a lot more capital expenditure to set it up.
Overall, I think the total profit from the whole thing was very small, right?
Yeah, it was.
And maybe it would have increased over the long term after we paid off some of the capital expense.
It would have.
But overall, all the markets we installed, and then you're kind of going back into retail, right? So it was like you go back.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, so you buy a bag of peanuts for 75 cents and sell it for $1 or whatever. Your margins are thinner, so you're not able to pay off that initial capital expense as fast.
Well, also if you think about it, with the office coffee, we could rent the equipment and then fund it, and so we didn't have to put in a lot of cash flow.
Yeah.
With Micromarkets, it's free to the employer. They give us the space within their office to set up our convenience store, but they don't pay anything. And so you can't charge them a rental. Therefore, I couldn't fund it with Pure Water Partners.
Yeah.
And so I had to come up with that money. And the average market was $10,000 to $15,000. And our very first market, they had 3 in one building.
Yep.
And so we did it for $30,000, but I'd pay $30,000 just to get it started without any assurance that it was going to work.
Yeah.
So it was a completely different model. But there's some really successful operators that do Micromarkets.
Yeah, there are.
So it wasn't the best for us, but that doesn't mean people shouldn't do markets.
Sure.
Again, it just depends on your end goal.
And I think we suffered a little bit from an economies of scale issue with that as well, right? Like some of our big competitors who are these big national companies, they have to charge $1 for a bag of peanuts, and we have to charge $1 for a bag of peanuts, but they maybe got the bag of peanuts for 60 cents, whereas we got them for 75.
Right.
So like they're making it work because of their buying power.
Right.
And maybe we could have gotten to that point eventually as well.
Eventually. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it hurt a little bit as a smaller company. We're not able to purchase so much at once.
Right. Exactly. So it was hard to compete for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and and to me, if I had to, like I said, I think the biggest issue with it was we tried, it's retail. We tried retail wasn't working for us, and then we tried to reincorporate some retail.
That's a really good point.
And it came full circle, and it's like, it shouldn't be too surprising that this retail didn't work for us again.
Yeah.
It worked, it kind of broke even-ish.
I feel like I'm hating on retail, but it just wasn't right for us.
There's a way to do it,
right.
But we focused on wholesale, and
right.
It just wasn't our
thing.
Niche.
Yeah, and that's something that's really important is, when you find your niche, stick to it. Now, the reason Pantry worked is because it was in the office coffee space.
Yeah.
It worked the same. We deliver coffee, we bill for it. We deliver Pantry, we bill for it.
You're putting napkins in the same cabinet that you're putting coffee bags in.
Exactly.
It's not very different.
Yeah, but then markets was completely different. So I was trying to reinvent the wheel, and it was a huge distraction. I wonder if I didn't go into markets, how much more OCS would have grown.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be so distracting. So that's just something entrepreneurs really need to figure out. Where am I focused? Because I feel like a lot of people see opportunity everywhere. I literally see opportunity everywhere. But having the discipline to say, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And that was something I really struggled with in the beginning because office coffee wasn't sexy.
Right.
Like selling to cafes and online and all this fun stuff. But selling to offices wasn't sexy, but it worked and I stuck to it. And that's ultimately why we stayed in business. So if I can give one piece of advice today, it's figure out your niche. And if it's working, stick to it. Don't get distracted unless it's in the same line of business.
Yep. Good advice.
Thanks.
So stepping back out, your goal, and this is kind of the reason you're adding in these revenue streams, was to sell the company at some undetermined point in the future. But maybe it was determined, so that's kind of what I'm asking. Did you have a revenue goal in mind or a valuation goal in mind, or did you just want to grow it until you got tired of it? Or, what did you think the sign would be that you're like, okay, now I know it's time to sell and move on?
It may sound really weird, but I believe in like the 7 years of completion, and I just really felt like God wanted me to work really hard for 7 years and then move on to something else. And I know that sounds crazy, but at 5.5 years, I remember, reading in the morning and kind of in some prayer, and I was like, I'm so tired. I don't know if I can make it another 1.5 years. And at that point, we weren't worth that much money.
Right.
And my goal was, 7 years, $3 million or more. And we were way off from that.
Right.
And it just was crazy in that last 1.5 years how much we ticked up towards $3 million, and then the valuation past that, that it really did work. And I feel like that whole conversation with God was kind of honored because it did happen. It happened in 7 years. Literally, I got to tell this story because it's so cool. So we were originally going to be acquired on February 9th, and then it got pushed to February 24th of this year. And that would have been right at the 7-year mark because we incorporated February 13th of 2013, right? And I was like, how cool, it's going to literally come down to, a week or so of the incorporation date. And then it got pushed out again to March. And I was so sad because I thought it'd be so cool for the story to say 7 years. And then, it finally happened March 9th. And then a few days later, I got my renewal from the Secretary of State. And so every year when you're incorporated, you have to refile and pay your Secretary of State fee. And it said March 7th as my incorporation date.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, what in the world? And then I remembered I sent the paperwork off on February 13th. But it takes about 4 weeks to process.
Yeah.
And so literally to the week, our anniversary would have been on March 7th, which was a Saturday. So we closed the next Monday, the next business day, literally 7 years to the date. That blew my mind. It was so cool.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You never told us.
I have lots of other little things. Just, keep asking questions. They'll come out.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot over the course of these
And how
episodes.
cool, too. It was 3/7, March 7th, 3/7, and he said, 7 years, $3 million. I don't know. I love 3 and 7. It's what I play when I go to Vegas.
Which you're going tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely play some roulette. So we got to that point. We sold, and you were able to give even more back to New Song because of that. But I know that you were even given to New Song prior to that when we weren't even making that much money, because that was kind of the goal all along. And I know that, giving even when it hurts is kind of a big value of yours.
It is.
Why do you think that's important? How were you able to do that, or come up with how much you wanted to give, or, just talk through your thought process each year when you were deciding how much to give back? So
originally we were going to do, $1 per bag. But then we had different size bags, and then
it's tricky.
Yeah, it was tricky, and then also that would have equated to nothing.
Right.
No money.
Well, and we weren't selling bags in the kiosk originally.
Right.
We were selling cups.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
And so I really just had to get quiet and spend time and try to figure out what I was supposed to give. I've always looked at this business as my job to just steward it, that it's not mine, but it's my job to run it well and to give well. And the whole purpose of the business was to be philanthropic. And there's a lot of different areas of thought and opinion on whether or not to go in debt to give. And it doesn't sound like that's wise, and I was going in debt. But the whole goal is to give. So if I just waited to give once I was profitable, New Song wouldn't have received anything until the 5th year. And that just seems weird. And I would tell people, hey, we give to New Song, but then we wouldn't be, and I just didn't feel right about that. So I said, before I pay myself, I will pay New Song, and I will pay my employees fairly. Then I will pay myself. And I knew God would honor that because that's why he gave this to me. And he did. But I just feel like that's the way I needed to do it. And every year we're able to give more and more to New Song, being one of the top 2 or 3 donors every year to the organization. So
awesome.
Yay.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. I'm glad we were able to give a big chunk to them. We were just down there in February.
Yeah.
And seeing what God's doing down there, and
it's
all
so
the plans
cool.
they have to grow the mission, and it's cool to be a part of that and able to see how we made the money that then went there.
Yes.
That's going to go to the swimming pool that they're building, and the the goods they're giving out in the villages. So
yeah, it really is, and that's what makes coming to work, fun and impactful, because anyone can go have a job, anyone can run a business, but on the days it's tough, when you have something like that motivating you, it just brings a different dynamic to owning a company.
Yeah.
So.
Well, this has been fun. It's got a little technical, I guess, but so does business sometimes.
Yes, indeed.
We'll try to come back next week with not such a bookkeeping kind of...
Something more fun,
Yeah,
maybe.
something fun. Well, I'll find something fun to talk about. So
Awesome.
ask some good questions.
Well, I enjoyed it. This was great.
Thanks.
Thank you.